Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia. Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. Be sure to check us out on our social channels. Search for First Paw Media and Dogworks Radio. And I am joined by my co-host, Toni Reitter. Toni, how's it going today?
Well, it's officially summer. I just had my first battle with a wasp for the year. And I don't know if I won or if it won. I sucked it up in my vacuum cleaner, but now I can see it in the vacuum cleaner. It's all dusty. It looks like it just survived the apocalypse. So now I'm terrified, and my vacuum cleaner is outside. So, yeah, it's been great.
Yes, it is. It is officially summer here in Alaska. We are in the high 70s here in Willow. We typically don't get much above 80 up here, but I know it does get a little bit warmer down there. And it's not only vacation time for a lot of dog mushers, but a lot of sled dogs as well. Those that are, you could either say fortunate or unfortunate enough to have the summer off. It's time to relax, gain a little bit of weight, and just kind of kick back and enjoy life of a sled dog for the next couple of months. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and some of them even get to make puppies. So it's a great time, especially if you're a boy dog.
That is true. It is sled dog season is in the air. So, guys, we're not going to talk about sled dog fornication tonight, but we are going to give you guys an update on a couple of stories that we've been talking about here in the off season. One in particular is the court case against Jesse Holmes. That has come to a conclusion as far as my understanding. And we're also going to talk about a Facebook post from Iditarod champion Mitch Stevie. He really let it known his thoughts about the Yukon Quest with a heck of a lot of comments. And we're going to dive into that and see if we can make sense of what's happening in the mushing world. So, Toni, give us an update on Jesse Holmes quickly.
Sure. So I did a little bit of research, just pulled up the court view for Alaska. And it looks like as of May 26th, the court case about his dog eating the little dog in its own backyard has come to a close. It looks like he pled no contest to the 10 charges of failure to contain, or can't remember exactly what it's called, failure to restrain an animal. And there were 10 counts of that. And then there was the 11th count of animal cruelty, but it shows as dismissed and case closed. So I assume that means that we don't have to worry about him being found guilty of that, as the case is closed. I don't know how that all works out for the sled dog races and his future with the Iditarod and other races. I assume with it being dismissed and no guilty charge, it's just, going to blow over, which I think is the right call. He definitely did not keep his animals under control, obviously, or we wouldn't be talking about this at all. But I don't think it deserved to be called animal cruelty. It was just a very big lapse of judgment that ended very sadly for the little dog.
And for folks that don't recall, just a quick summary of that. He was staying in a hotel right before he went to the Kobuk 440 after Iditarod in the first week or so of April, and he drops all of his dogs, which means he lets them out of the box or out of the trailer to stretch their legs, use the bathroom and such. It is a very common occurrence in the sled dog world, especially in the sprint world. It's very common to have 6, 8, 10, 12 dogs running around the truck to sort of let go, if you will. Most of the dogs, most of the time, are very well under voice control, but in this instance, his dogs caught the whiff or something of this little dog down the hill at one of the residences close to the hotel there, and the dogs took off. Dogs are going to be dogs. Unfortunately, the little dog did not fare well. It was killed, unfortunately, and it caused quite a bit of a hubbub in the local community, not just in the mushing community, but throughout South Central Alaska here on the Facebook pages and the local gossip and all of that. But as you said, Toni, the big time charge of animal cruelty was dropped, and we've talked about it in the last few episodes. If you are convicted of animal cruelty as a dog musher, that pretty much seals your fate in terms of a racing career. They do not take kindly, as they should, any animal cruelty charges. So thankfully, that charge was dropped. And as you mentioned, the failure to restrain dogs, that can mean really anything in the dog world. And I'm speaking to this as a business owner, dog trainer since 1994. That charge is typical for anything from a dog that is not on a leash at the dog or on the hiking trail or anything like that, up to something like this were to occur. And of course, here in the Mat-Su Valley, where this incident occurred, they do have a pretty strict leash law. They're not driving around in dog catcher trucks, handing out tickets, if you will, to every dog that's off leash, but they do enforce it if there is a complaint. And I'm sure that this was warranted in terms of a complaint, so that's why those charges were filed, and he pled no contest. For folks that do not know what no contest means in the court world, that means he is not accepting guilt, but he is not saying that what he did was not wrong. So it's sort of like, I'm throwing myself to the mercy of the court. I'm not going to say I'm guilty, but I'm going to let you make that decision. And I'm sure that in this case, the judge and the prosecutor and the defense attorney came up with a amicable agreement for this, and the charges were dealt with in whatever way they were. I don't know if it was a fine or restitution to the victim. I have no idea. That was not said. Is that correct, Toni?
I really didn't look too much into that, because I was just trying to really focus on the charge of animal cruelty, and it was, as you know, it was a little bit difficult for me to find which one of the charges was that one. But I did see something about, fine to be paid or something. I don't know if, we'll see something come out in civil court, as far as maybe the dog's owner taking him to court to pay for vet bills and that sort of thing, which was mentioned in their original post on Facebook, which is what started everybody paying attention to the story.
Right. So we will continue to cover it, mainly because it's an Iditarod musher. And of course, I guess that's our job as a podcast to give an unbiased sort of real world opinion on that. So we hope everything works out well for both sides, both Jesse Holmes and the victim. I do not obviously know their names, so we'll keep that out of the podcast. So that is our Jesse Holmes update. And next up is a post by former multi-Iditarod champion Mitch Seavey. He's talking about the Yukon Quest, and a real quick summary of that. As you know, if you've listened to the last couple of episodes, the Quest is sort of at a quandary. They don't know what to do with each other. It's held by two boards in two different countries. One country says, we want to do it this way. The other country says, we want to do it that way. And they're sort of at an impasse right now. And here we are at the beginning of June when we record this. So they don't know what to do with each other. But as it stands right now, there is not going to be another 1,000-mile race in Alaska/Yukon coming up next year. It has not been a 1,000-mile race since before COVID, I guess. February of 2020 was the last time that there was a 1,000-mile Yukon Quest. So we'll see what happens with that. But what did Mitch say? He posted this on May 22nd. So it's been a week or so, but it's really put a lot of comments on the thread. So what did he say to sort of summarize it?
Sure. So the gist is Mitch is kind of from the old school of mushing, where it's, trust the musher. They know their dogs better than anybody else, be it a race official or a vet or whatever, respect those positions, of course, but at the same time, don't make rules that tie the hands unnecessarily of the mushers. He's also very, very much pro, just that standard 1,000-mile race, let it be tough. We know that from his feelings on the Iditarod this year, and it basically is the same feeling in his post. It's pretty long, it's pretty wordy, but it goes into detail his thoughts on the run-rest ratio. He was responding to an opinion piece in the Anchorage Daily News, which I could not read because I am not able to pay for the subscription right now. So it was behind a paywall. But it sounds like basically, what we've heard from a lot of the mushers early on that were against the mandatory rest upping of 120 hours for the overall race. And that's, he basically, he admits that he's not a Yukon Quest musher, but he has had teams in the race in previous years. He's sent his handlers with his dog teams up there. And of course, Dallas won his rookie Yukon Quest a few years back. I believe that was either 2011 or 2012. So, it may not be the Iditarod and it may not be quote unquote Mitch's race where he's very familiar, but he is familiar with dog care. He is familiar with running 1,000-mile races. And so I think his opinion and his expertise is something that should be considered. Whether or not he's run the Yukon Quest doesn't really matter overall because the science is the same no matter which race it is, be it the Yukon Quest, the Iditarod, or the Finmund Slope It, or Finnmark Slope It, or any of those long distance races. It's trust the mushers. And the big thing that Mitch kept pointing out was that more rest does not automatically mean better care. It doesn't necessarily mean that your dogs are going to be better prepared to run 1,000 miles. It's just like if you get out of rhythm with your exercise routine. I know I have that problem where if you take a break from your daily routine, getting back up and getting back on that routine can be difficult. And some of these, 36-hour mandatory layovers, that's where, the dogs, it takes them a day to get back in the rhythm, if they get back in the rhythm at all. And so that was what he and other mushers have been pointing out is more rest doesn't always mean better dog care. He suggests that that's going to lead to more orthopedic injuries. So it was a really good read. I shared it both on Twitter and on Facebook, not just because it's the Boss Man CV, but I think he does point out a lot of good points, and he doesn't have a dog in the fight. This isn't him saying, this is my race and I don't want it to change like he does when he's complaining about things that are happening in Iditarod. This is him just as an observer going, look, you guys, mommy and daddy aren't getting along, and I'm going to agree a little bit more with daddy than I am mommy right now, is basically what he's saying.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here looking through the comments as you talk, Toni, and most from the 150 comments that I see, those that are mushers, most of them are either Iditarod or Quest mushers themselves. Of course, Brent Sass, both champion of the Quest and Iditarod, Cindy Abbott, Gabe Dunham, Thomas Werner, Tamara Reynolds, Rob Cook, Matt Paviglio, all sorts of names agree with what he says, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of that thought process behind it. But I know you got involved with this from a fan's perspective, and I see a couple of comments that you made, in particular to some comments about the trackers. And for folks that are not familiar, there has been a lot of talk, not only on this particular thread on Mitch's page, and by the way, this is on his Facebook page, his kennel page, Mitch CV. So even if you're not friends with Mitch, you can read and comment to this, since I assume that this is an open page and it's still allowing comments. Yep. But there was a lot of talk about the trackers and how they're not accurate and how it would be very difficult to sort of gauge rest based on trackers. But what are your thoughts on that? And then secondly, what are the thoughts out of all of these comments from a fan's perspective? Because often that's a little bit different than the musher's perspective.
Mm-hmm. So my train of thought just flew out the window. I think I'll answer the second question first, as far as what fans are saying. Really depends on which musher they're listening to or which official they're listening to. I'm really not seeing any thoughts change throughout this whole thing. And while there's a lot of comments on Mitch's page under his post, the post has been shared and there's been even more comments on other groups. There's a Yukon Quest 300 group that you have to join to be able to read. And that's where a lot of the Yukon side of the board has decided that they want to comment. They're not necessarily commenting on Mitch's post to his face, basically. They're in a group that they feel a little safer to be able to just basically say, well, if he doesn't like it, then he should join the board. And personally, as a fan, I think that's the wrong attitude to take. I get really tired of getting hit with that a lot from certain people that are on this board that have gotten on my case for other races that I've said, it's a bummer that they could not have continued, especially with the Tuscamina 200. And it's just, well, if you didn't like it, you should have joined the board. Okay, well, as we all know, most of these mushing boards, there's a lot of ego involved, and it's very difficult for an outsider or a newbie to join a board. Even if you are a musher, a longtime musher that does have the respect of the community, it's hard for you to get on the board. And so I think fans especially, need to really look at the tone that everyone is taking. I don't agree that the Alaska board should be so silent and only play the game in the media, but I also don't agree that the Yukon board should come so defensive and so hard and say that, if you don't like it, then join the board. They were answering that to different mushers who are very involved in the race as either racers themselves, or they have been on the board in the past and they felt that they were shut out. I think that needs to be looked at. I think the attitude of these boards needs to be looked at, because I think that's where the most frustration is. If you want somebody to take your side, you need to have that attitude that you're actually going to listen, or you're going to have these mushers speaking out whether they've run the race or not. As far as what was the first question? The first question, the trackers.
Yes.
As far as the trackers, we've seen it. I believe one of Susan Rogan's quasi-quest races this last year. Of course, she's the president of the Yukon side of the Yukon Quest board, but they've been tooling around with different formats since COVID hit. And I believe one of them this year actually used the trackers to track resting in the checkpoints. I personally don't think that that's the safest option. We've seen multiple times in multiple different races, if the dogs move that sled enough, it registers as movement as you're on the trail, even though the team has not left that checkpoint. There are places along the trail, especially since one of the proposals is, hey, let them rest on the trail and let that count. Just use the trackers. We've seen where the tracker drops off for hours at a time, and that's when fans start freaking out. And some of us joke that the aliens have taken them, and then all of a sudden they appear somewhere else on the trail, or they appear halfway across Alaska in a place that that they weren't even flown if they were being flown off the trail. So I don't think the technology is there yet. I think that in the future, possibly, that would be an excellent strategy, especially as volunteering continues to dwindle for these races. But I don't see it being really plausible in the near future to fix it, say in the next 10 months, or I don't even think we have 10 months. I think it's more like 8 months before the next series of races happen. So, it's interesting to me. It's more the rookie or the mushers that haven't been in these races long time. The newer mushers, they're the ones that are saying, can we use this new technology, versus the old school mushers who, it took them a long time to even warm up to the GPS at the beginning of this new technology to watch the races. They're still sitting there going, look, there's too many factors. You're having to believe the computer, you're having to believe these GPS trackers, and you're having to take the musher at their word when those trackers do fail. So I think it's something that, it's fun to play around with some of these races that don't really matter. But when you're talking about races that have a big purse and also cost the teams a lot of money just to enter, I don't think you need to be playing around with that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's a key point that you made, the lower races or the smaller races using this technology to sort of sort out the problems. I know that they do that a lot on the junior Iditarod. They use technology there before it's implemented on the big race. And I remember when my daughter Nicole ran a junior Iditarod several years ago, that was when they went to this new form of trackers that did the internet posting with their pictures and all the fancy graphics and all the extra stats and stuff. That was the year before that was implemented on Iditarod. They did it on the junior Iditarod to make sure that they were able to do that, and that's a pretty common occurrence in mushing, to be able to sort of flesh out that technology. Toni, you had mentioned that he listed some stats or some science behind it, and sort of from a musher's perspective, I want to just dive into that pretty quickly. He said, for most teams, 50-mile runs with 4-hour rests is realistic and sustainable. It can be run at an equilibrium almost indefinitely. But double that to a 100-mile run without the rest. Of course, that's when fatigue and inflammation and, of course, injuries and lack of rest and poor feeding and all that come into play. And that's a great analysis right there. Of course, coming from a multiple champion, he knows his stuff with this. And for many years in dog mushing, especially in long-distance mushing, it was sort of an even split of 6 hours on, 6 hours off, and you would stop wherever that 6 hours occurred, whether you would be at a checkpoint or not. And when you add in things like the Canadian side, the U.S. side, back and forth again, the Canadian side is asking for where there's more rest and checkpoints, no matter what the run rest schedule is. And I know that has shifted quite a bit from longer run, shorter rest than that sort of equal run rest schedule. That is almost impossible to do, and that's what Mitch was talking about. If there are some runs that are less than 50 miles, which is that perfect equilibrium, where there are some that are almost 100 miles apart, and there's mountain ranges and weather and all sorts of other conditions that could play into that. That's why these longer rests and checkpoints make it so difficult. And as we know with Iditarod, there are those two mandatory 8-hour rest and then the 24-hour rest that are pretty specific where they have to happen. They have to happen, of course, one time on the Yukon, and you have to do it at the White Mountain, and you have to do your 24-hour at some point along the trail. It doesn't say where, but once you declare it, you cannot leave early, whether your dogs are wanting to go or not. So these rules are there for a reason, and it almost always has absolutely nothing to do with the human side of the team. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and with the Iditarod, the 24-hour, I think that's a really good point to make. Is that's where you see which teams are capable of pushing on and being a top contender, and which ones fall back. We see it every year. Some of these teams, they're the first in to one of those places like Takatna or wherever the typical 24-hour rest is. And you're thinking they look like a really great team. They rest 24 hours, and then the dogs are like, you know what, that was fun, but now I'm going to trot the rest of the way to Nome. And that's great, but then they end up, coming in 10th or 20th place. I think we saw that with Mitch Speedy this year, which he kind of knew that was going to happen because he had an untested team. That had only gone to the halfway point and back. They'd never gone to the other half of the regular trail. And so he knew once that 24 was over that, if they didn't push, he wasn't going to ask them to push. And so I think that that's what you're going to see. And you're going to see a longer race in the Yukon Quest, and not necessarily for the betterment of the race, not necessarily for the betterment of the dogs. And certainly not for the betterment of the volunteers who are now going to be asked to stay even longer than what they normally are. And I think it's also telling that most of the quote unquote slower teams with the Siberian breed, they're the ones that are very much with Mitch on this. They don't like the idea of more mandatory rest. They don't agree with the Yukon side of the board. Karin Ramstead, Rob Cook, they're both adamant that Mitch is right, that this is going to lead to injuries that do not need to happen. And if you're going to argue that this is all about the dogs, then don't sit there and go, you know what, yeah, it might happen, but it's still better. Well, no, if I'm having to send all my dogs home because now their feet are swollen or their ankles are swollen, that doesn't seem like it's for the betterment of the dogs. It seems like it's just a control issue at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, and of course we'll keep it up on that. And I'm going to give an update to our upcoming episode here in just a second. But I have to ask Toni, since we asked at the last time we talked about the Quest, what's your opinion right now? Here we are, 1st of June, and we have some new commentary back and forth. Are we going to see a Yukon Quest this year?
I still think we're not going to see that 1,000-mile across the border. I know Alaska says we're going to have a 1,000-mile race somehow up there in Fairbanks, which more power to them. I'll believe it when I see it. I just don't know how that's going to come off. I think we're going to see a format similar to what we saw this last year. But yeah, I think I'm starting to show my colors on how I feel about this. I was very undecided when the news first broke, but the more I read and the more of the attitude that comes out of the different players, it's really hard not to take sides.
There you have it, guys. And I would agree. I would agree with you, Toni. I think we'll probably see something very similar to what you mentioned. So we'll see how it goes. And on that, I wanted to get to it today, but we're running out of time. I want to talk about the other side of the argument, Toni. There has been a lot of talk about a different type of Yukon Quest and how it could benefit smaller teams, and how the up-and-coming mushers today don't want to spend all their time out in the middle of nowhere at 60 degrees below zero. And there's been a lot of talk about that, not only in the mushing community, but in the outdoor community at large. Publications like Outside Magazine and, New York Times and some bigger name publications have sort of thrown their hat into the ring to talk about this because of the shifting dynamics of outdoor activities. And I think that would be an interesting topic to cover next time. How about it?
Sounds good to me. It'll give me a time to research these articles you're talking about. But yeah, and then after that, I think the big news will be musher signups, because we're already in June now. So musher signups are going to start happening.
Yes, it is. The Iditarod picnic is towards the end of the month, and we will definitely talk about that when it comes. But yes, the next episode will be the sort of shifting generational dynamics with outdoor recreation. That's something I know a little bit about. I went to school for it, and I think we could offer up a pretty good commentary back and forth. So on that note, we are out of time. Toni, thank you very much for joining us today, and we will see everybody else next time. This is Robert for Mushing Radio. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.